All right, so we've been talking about quadratics. We've talked about how to go between the three different forms. Remember, there's standard form, factored form, and vertex form. And we've gone like from factored to standard, where we multiplied everything out. The same from vertex to standard, and we talked about how to go from standard to vertex. What we haven't done is how to talk about going from standard to factored or vertex to factored. So really we're going to focus on doing the standard to factored today. And the whole reason we're going to do that is because our end goal is to be able to find the roots. That's the biggest purpose of factoring in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And we're going to practice this, but I'm going to tell you that if you can't factor, Algebra 2 is going to be almost nearly impossible for you. So we need to make sure that this is a skill that you really get down so that you're ready moving forward. All right, so let's just remind ourselves what it looks like to go from standard form to factored form, because if we're, other way around, to go from factored to standard, because the idea is that if we're going to go the other way around, we're going to just undo everything that we used to do. So let's look at what I mean. All right, so in this example, I've given you, this is like a given equation in standard form. In factored form. I'm really struggling today. All right, this is a given equation in factored form, right? It's got a pattern of 3 out here. I noticed that it has roots of -2 and +5. Remember, those are insides are opposite for roots. And then when we change that over, so this whole example is me changing from factored to standard. All right, so we're going to figure out what these steps are so that we can undo them. So notice the first thing that happened was we distributed. All right, and then we got this 4-term polynomial down here. All right, then we combined like terms. We brought the 3 down. So remember, we would bring the 3 down, and then we would distribute the 3 to get this final answer. So the first thing we need to do is undo that last step. So what we're doing right here, our first step here, is to undo distributive property. And the goal here is going to be, can you look at the numbers and determine what must have gone into all of these numbers that I can undistribute, okay? And when we undo the distributive property, really what we're doing is we're taking out or dividing by the GCF. All right, so that's step 1. All right, then let's assume that we're already to something like this. We need to figure out how to go to the next step back. Well, and I guess not even the next step back. Really the question is, how did we get from right here, where we have x squared minus 3x minus 10, how can we get that from the original problem? And I want you to take a second to pause the video and see if you can notice any patterns. Did you pause it? Hopefully you found 2 number patterns in there. Okay, the 2 patterns that you should see is that this last number, -10, is the multiple, or what you get when you multiply these last 2 numbers. It's the product, okay? So the last number is the product. So I'm going to write that down, product. And the middle number, this -3, where do you think that would have come from +2 and -5? All right, hopefully you see that that's the sum. That's what you get when you add those 2 numbers. All right, so our next step is going to be to pick 2 numbers that multiply to our last number C, right? Calling that C because it's the number without the variable, and that add to give you the middle number B. So I just want to show you what that will look like before we do a problem. I almost always set up this little puzzle-looking thing. The top number is what they multiply, and the bottom number is what they add to. And then my goal is going to be to come up with these 2 numbers in the middle. I'm trying to think of 2 numbers that multiply to -10 and add to -3. And obviously I know the answer from this one, but if I think about that long enough, I should come up with -5 and +2, which you're going to notice will match those numbers that were in the factors before, -5 and +2. All right, so you need to have all those steps down. And I'm sorry, I added one more step. It's what I just said, but I didn't have it written down. We want to make sure that we write the factors with the GCF on the outside. Notice that's like what this original format looks like, right? The GCF's on the outside, and then we have our 2 factors. Okay, let's look at a few problems together. All right, so in this problem, what we just said is the first step I always want to do is think about my GCF. And I'm thinking about unfactoring. So my goal is to come up with like a format where there's some number that would have been on the outside and something that would be on the inside, so such that when I distribute this, I get 6x squared minus 4x. So I have to think about that. I think about what number can divide into both of those. And I know a 2 can divide into 6 and 4. And then if there's an x in both of these, then an x must have been distributing on the outside. Okay, so I have to think for myself, right? 2x times what will give me 6x squared? And hopefully if you think about that, it should be 2x times 3x. All right, and then we're going to undistribute again. We need to think about 2x times what will give me negative 4x. So if we think about that, we should get negative 2, right? 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. So I'm going to rewrite this so I'm not in so many colors. That's going to give me this factored form of 2x times 3x minus 2. All right, and then the last step, this problem says change to factored form. All right, so I just did that. And notice I didn't do this little thing where I said we have to come up with a puzzle, top number multiplies, bottom number adds, because at this point, both of my x's are by themselves. I don't have x squared in my equation anymore. That's how I know I'm done. So you may want to put a little star in your note that says, you know you're finished when you don't have x squared left in your equation anymore. Okay, but the last part of this problem, it says do this to find the solution. So we just want to practice finding solutions. Remember, solutions are the same thing as roots. So we're just going to set both of these things equal to 0. So we're going to say 2x equals 0. Well, to solve that, I'm going to divide by 2. So one of my roots or solutions is that x equals 0. All right, I'm going to set this other one up. 3x minus 2 equals 0. Add 2 to both sides. 3x equals 2. Divide by 3. And x is going to equal 2/3. Now remember, usually those are easy. You can find them just by looking at the equation, but when we have two numbers or when the x is on the outside, for a little while you all are going to want to solve those by hand just to make sure you don't make mistakes. All right, let's look at 2 more quick examples. All right, in this example, again, we're going to start with our GCF. We're going to think about what it is we can undistribute out of this problem. I look at all of these terms, and the only thing I see that they have in common, the greatest common factor thing that I can divide by all of them is 2. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to divide all of these by 2. That's going to leave me with x squared plus x minus 12. All right, it may take you a minute to see where I'm getting at, but I'm going to start going a little bit quicker. Now, this is a factored form, but it's not really the one that I need. Remember, it's not completely factored if we still have an x squared in it, so we're going to have to fix that. Since it has the x squared, I'm going to go ahead and set up my little puzzle. Remember, that means the top number is what they multiplied to, and it comes from this last number in the equation. So that's negative 12. The bottom number is what they're going to add to, which comes from the middle number. And then that middle number is 1. So now this is up to you. You got to come up with 2 numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to give you positive 1. If you think about that, you should make sure you get your signs right. Positive 4 times negative 3. Those are my 2 numbers that multiply. And some of you are probably going to have to write these notes, multiply and add, until you remember. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make our factors. We're already on to step 3. That's y equals, we write the GCF on the outside. And I make my factors using these 2 numbers I just chose. So they're going to be x, because that's how factors start, right? Both of the factors are going to start with an x. Plus 4, because I chose positive 4. Minus 3, because I chose negative 3. So this is my factored form. All right, I've got that first part. Now we're going to find solutions. Remember, solutions are just setting each of these equal to 0, which in this case is just going to be a shortcut. We know the solutions are going to be negative 4 and positive 3. All right. Again, we'll start with the GCF. Now notice in this case, there is no number that I can take out of all of these, which is going to make the GCF 1. You can write the 1 on the outside, but in factored form, it was kind of implied, right? If there's nothing on the outside, that it is just the standard pattern. So we don't really even have to write that, which means now we're ready, because there's still an x squared, we're ready to set up our pattern. So you may want to make a note to yourself from before that this pattern that we set up, we use it because we have x squared left. So the last number goes on the top, which is what my numbers are going to multiply to. And the middle number goes on the bottom, which is what they're going to add to. Remember your positive and negative rules. If two numbers multiply to give you a positive number, then they're either both positive or both negative. In this case, since they're going to add to give me a -7, I need to be thinking about two negative numbers. So the two negative numbers I'm going to come up with are -5 and -2. So now I'm ready to write my factored form. Again, you can write the 1 in the front if you want to, but I'm probably not going to. I'm just going to go ahead and write my factors. All right, and they are x minus 5 and x minus 2. So there's my factored form. And now we're ready to go ahead and name our roots. And they are going to be x equals +5 and x equals +2. Remember, roots and factors are opposite from one another. Okay, this last example is just a little bit different. Usually I don't teach this until like the third day we're working on this skill, but I think you all can pick this up now. Notice that this standard form looks a little different than the ones we've looked at before. First of all, there is no middle, and that should kind of ring a bell to you. Think about, we're undistributing, right? So everything we start with or end with is going to look like a problem that was distributive property. So we're undoing that problem. And this one has no middle. So we want to think about when we have no middle and we have subtraction. So notice that this says -9. It won't work if we don't have -9. If these two conditions are met, that's going to tell me that my two factors need to be conjugates. All right, because that's the only way I can get those middle things to cancel. So then I just really have to think to myself, well, in conjugates, they look exactly the same on the inside, right? One's plus and one's minus. And the last numbers multiply to give me this last number. So what's a positive and negative number that multiply to give me -9? And hopefully you're coming up with +3 and -3. Okay, and then very similarly, I need to come up with what are two numbers that multiply, or the same number, because it needs to be conjugate, so these two things need to be exactly the same, right? That multiply to give me 4x squared. And that should be 2x times 2x. All right, the last thing you want to do on these is just double check that you've done everything correctly. So I'm going to take a second to do that. Let's see, if I double check this, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. +3 times -3 is -9. And these are conjugates because one is positive and one is negative. All right, so that's going to go ahead and give me my factored form there. And then if I want to name the roots, I'm just going to set these equal to 0. And remember, I'm doing that because this has a number in the front, so it's not quite as easy as just looking at it. So -3 from both sides, 2x equals -3. Divide by 2, so x is -3/2. Solve this one. And you should kind of get the pattern that when you solve conjugates, if you go through all those steps, the roots are opposite also. So this is, when you solve this one, you're going to get +3/2. All right, so those are the examples you need in your notes, and we will practice this skill together tomorrow.